Well, it's 2:30 on the dot, ladies and gentlemen, and so we might make a start on today's webinar session, of course, covering road safety audits. My name is Angela Juhas and I'll be your webinar moderator today. So if you do have any technical concerns, my details will be up there on your screen momentarily and I will assist you through those. Joining me in the Sydney webinar studio, we do have Paul Hillier, who will be our presenter today. Many of you would already know Paul's name because he's certainly not new to the whole webinar program. And I will give a brief bio on Paul momentarily. Also joining Paul in the Sydney studio there, we have David McTiernan of ARB, who is quite heavily involved in the update of the Austroads guides relating to RSA. I hope I got that right, but I'm sure he'll tell me if I haven't in just one moment. Now we'll cover off a few of the formalities, the housekeeping items as per usual, and then we'll make a start with our webinar presentation today. So those are my details there. In case anyone has any concerns, please feel free to contact me at any time. Now in terms of the housekeeping, though we have allowed a full 90 minutes for today's webinar, I'm sure we'll be finishing up probably around the 60-minute mark. However, if we do have a really good discussion going, we're more than happy to stay here for a few minutes afterwards, depending on your questions, as I said. We are recording today's session, ladies and gentlemen, as per usual, and a link to the recording as well as the presentation material will be sent to everyone once the webinar has concluded. So feel free not to take notes as everything will be sent to you later on today. Now, webinars are most enjoyed when they're interactive, and so we ask you to please send through your questions, feedback, comments, anything you have to say. Type those into the questions box and we'll receive those at our end. I'd also like to alert you to the chat function of your control panel, which, although I don't have a picture of it there on the screen, I will be typing some discussion questions in there, so do periodically have a look and see what's in there and give us your thoughts on those. Now, without further ado, I will tell you a little bit about Paul Hillier, our presenter today. Now, he's a very modest man, so he'll absolutely hate me saying all of this, but he certainly deserves the credit. Paul has close to 25 years' experience in road safety, network management and maintenance fields, and a wide appreciation of current and emerging issues. Paul has a wealth of experience in road safety audits and investigations in many countries around the world, including Vietnam, Philippines, China, Samoa, Thailand, Morocco, Dubai, India. So he's certainly very well travelled. Paul is also very experienced in investigating and reporting on highway provision and maintenance related legal cases, though through being involved as an expert witness in over 500 incidents in the UK, Australia, New Zealand and the Middle East. So his experience is extremely wide and we're very privileged to have him here presenting today. Paul, how are you going today?
I'm very well, thanks, Angela. You find us in a lovely Sydney day here. It's nice and warm and sunny, and hopefully where everyone else is. So thank you very much for the introduction. As mentioned, we do have a special guest with us today, David McTiernan, also in the Sydney office. David's one of our senior team leaders in our Safe Systems division. So welcome, David.
Thanks, Paul.
It'd be good to warm up those fingers, perhaps, if we could ask people to type into the box there whereabouts you are and perhaps what the weather is today. And Angela might be able to pick out some highlights there from where people are dialing in from.
Absolutely. We want to get everyone practicing using that questions box and getting used to the whole interaction side of the webinar system. And then we do have a discussion question to follow shortly thereafter. Okay, thank you for those of you who have typed in your responses. Kuzani from Wet Brisbane. Well, I'm sorry to hear that's the case over there in Vegas. Hopefully it cheers up a little bit for the weekend. Rob from Bundaberg. Thank you, Rob, for joining us. Wow, we've got quite a wide audience. So we're covering Australia and New Zealand very well. We have Viviane from Auckland. Thank you. Paul from Bathurst, which is great. I'm sorry to hear about all the wet weather that some of our audience members are typing through to me at the moment. That's a shame, and hopefully for the Easter weekend it cheers up a little bit. David in sunny Perth. I'm glad it's sunny. It's always sunny in Perth, is it not? And Tim from Perth. Oh, geez. Even someone from Port Pirie there, Kevin. Thank you for joining us. All right. Well, it looks like everyone can use the question box function very, very well, and I'm glad. As I said, we'll be moving into a discussion question momentarily. And so Paul's popped that up on your screen there. Hopefully everyone can see that now. And the question is, designing a road to meet documented standards will guarantee that the road is safe. So the answer choices there are true or false, and we'd love to hear what you think. What do you think, Paul?
Oh, well, we'll give people a little bit of time, but I know the answer I think I'd like people to be thinking about, but then we'll perhaps analyse the results as they come in.
Absolutely. We don't want to sway people's choices, although we seem to have an audience that is very much of the belief that false is the answer to that question. In fact, 100% of the respondents so far have said false. So I'm suspecting that's what you wanted to hear, Paul?
Excellent, excellent. Thanks for that. Well, very definitely. I think people are rightly saying there, recognising that just because we design something to standards, yes, it's a good start, gives us a baseline, but of course we have to be wary of or be aware of the local circumstances and the characteristics of the road and the various traffic there. So just as designing a road to meet a standard doesn't guarantee its safety, it doesn't necessarily also mean that it's going to be unsafe. So we just need to be aware of the particular situation and what we're trying to design for, and as we'll talk about as we go on the webinar, our various road user groups. Who are we actually looking for to be using this particular facility or this road? So that's encouraging. Let's have a little think about what we're going to be doing today in the webinar. Well, it's very definitely an introduction. You'll hear some awareness material and then we'll inform you about an upcoming series. But certainly today we'll be asking a few of those W's questions, what, why, when, who does road safety auditing, and importantly for people to justify road safety auditing, what are the likely costs and what are the benefits that we can get out of road safety auditing. So without no further ado, let's have a look at some of the basics in terms of road safety auditing. Well, first started up around about the 1980s in the UK, and it is basically a formal check. It's a formal and systematic check on a length of road or a road section, and it's traditionally or typically commissioned by the project sponsor or a client. It's done by a team of auditors, and they're typically experienced in terms of road safety and traffic management. It's important the word team there. It's not a true audit if there's only one person looking at the particular road section. So we might get some experts in other areas as we need, but typically they'll be experienced in road safety and traffic management. It's also really important to note that the auditors need to be totally independent of the designers of the scheme. In that way, the findings and the recommendations have some clout, and they can also be fed back to the project and the designers to work out what they're going to do with those and how they're going to react to the things that have been found. So it's really important that the auditors are free to pick up the risks and hazards that they can detect on the road. So it's about identifying those risks and hazards, and it's also about assessing those for their severity and likelihood. And what we then do is we'll detail what we found in a report. Now, nearly always we'll be asked to, as auditors, to prepare recommendations on countermeasures. I say nearly always. There are some jurisdictions that we know where auditors are asked not to make recommendations, and then the report is fed back into the project team, and then they may have engineers themselves that can develop countermeasures. The final step, or the penultimate step, is for the client then to make a decision whether to act to mitigate the risk and hazard or not. Now, as you can imagine, there are typically a number of options, and we need to work out whether we're going to cover the risk off in full or only partially, and what level of risk we're prepared to accept on the network. But then there's a final stage where we look to what we call close the loop, where we make sure that the things that have been picked up and the options that we've come up with are then implemented so that we effectively close the audit out. Let's step back and remember why we're doing road safety audits in the first place. Well, our experience shows that new roads are not always as safe as they should be or could be, or indeed that we might expect them to be. That might be for a few reasons. There might be some safety problems that get overlooked during the design. We may over-rely on those technical standards, or the technical standards maybe don't match up too well. They don't match together. We might be using 2 or 3 different standards, and the interface between them can be difficult sometimes. It may also be something to do with the quality of the experience of the designers, but please don't think I'm being too critical here, because I'm sure we're all aware people have had some involvement. Designing a road is an incredibly hard task. There are many factors to consider. We're not just talking about the geometry here, and we're talking about how we react for all the different road users that are out there and all their demands and what they need to do on a daily basis. Indeed, the designer might also have a lack in the information that's given to them. They might not have all the factors or all the local issues available to them. And I guess, going back to how hard the task is, can we really expect a designer to address everything? Isn't it great if we have that extra set of eyes that the road safety audit provides? So in summary, the road safety audits are an insurance policy. It's much easier and much cheaper to change a design than to discover issues once we've got the road open to the public and have to react. So once the road is built, it gets a lot more expensive to rectify some of the problems or indeed to mitigate some of the risks and hazards. So much easier to get there in the first place. There are also some wider principles and philosophies in terms of the road safety auditing and the objectives. We are trying to ultimately minimise the number and severity of crashes on our road network. So road safety auditing can make a big contribution to our efforts to reduce the road toll. We're considering road safety for all of our road users, particularly our vulnerable road users, and then also when our traffic and our traffic mix varies according to where we are and what the usage of the road is. But it's also a feedback opportunity, as I mentioned, that second set of eyes, to help us continually improve our practices and our designs for not just us, but also our construction and maintenance staff down the track. So a really good feedback opportunity to improve things. Just as we've looked at what a road safety audit is, we also need to be aware of what a road safety isn't. It's not an opportunity to redesign a scheme, and it's certainly not a technical check on the designer's competence. As we mentioned, it is a really hard task. It is not also an assessment of the merits or otherwise of the scheme. You might have a look at the drawings or indeed be out on the side of a new scheme, and you might not actually think too much of its functionality, or there may be some limitations in your eyes as to the scheme. Well, it's certainly not an opportunity to assess the merits of that particular scheme. So that's the road safety audit, what it is and what it isn't. Well, let's have a think about some of the benefits. If we put them in place, then ultimately we can have some safer roads and some more uniform roads where we are in our jurisdiction. We can reduce our whole of life costs, as we mentioned. We can actually implement things and take action before we incur larger costs. We can help achieve those crash reduction targets. We can reduce the need to modify new schemes, and please don't forget that it's also in terms of the media and the public relations as well that we have with when we have to go back and actually put things in place on a road that's just been opened. Continue improvement, and there's also the thing about the success stories of road safety auditing. If you get the good stories out there, you spread the word, then that will generate more road safety audits. So it can be self-perpetuating. But what about the costs? We of course have to consider the costs of undertaking road safety auditing and how significant they are. Well, various studies have shown that for a large-scale project, a road safety audit will typically take up about 4 to 10% of the road design cost. However, it can be less than that. So there's just a rough rule of thumb. But in terms of the total project costs, a road safety audit around about 0.5% of the total project. So as you can see there, it represents pretty good value for money. What we do find is that the earlier we detect a risk or a hazard or a problem, the cheaper it is for us to rectify it. So, as we said a couple of times already, the earlier the better in terms of getting in there and changing things. But in terms of the cost of, or benefits in terms of saving crashes, we can actually use our costs of crashes that we have in various jurisdictions to work out the value or benefit from our road safety auditing. In Australia, for example, if our road safety audit just saves one life, in terms of cost for society, we're saving Australia around about $2.4 million. And for a serious injury, around about $220,000 for preventing that incident from happening. But don't forget, if there is an incident, then it's not just the dollar value. It's also in terms of the effect on families, people's emotional standing, etc., also affected by any incidents that occur. So the bottom line, very definitely, is prevention is definitely better than cure. There are lots of cost-benefit studies out there in terms of road safety auditing, and there are a number that look at the benefit cost of the options that various people have proposed from road safety auditing. And as you can just see a few here, over 78% of all proposed actions had a BCR greater than 1. Well, obviously that means they're going to be effective. Once we start getting up around the 2 and 3 mark for a BCR, then they become particularly attractive to implement. But here are the key stats that I like. This is from an Australian study, and it's been quoted by the World Bank by a friend of mine, Fei Deng, in 2012. The paper mentions or alludes to a $36 benefit for every $1 that's spent on the audit at the design stage. And for the audit of an existing road, a benefit of $6 for every $1 spent on road safety auditing. So I don't know about the audience there, but I would certainly take those odds or those benefits every day of the week in terms of our dollar spent. A return of $36 for every dollar we spend on the design stage audit. Quite compelling, and to me, makes it a no-brainer in terms of doing our road safety audit. Okay, that's a lot of introductory information. Just want to check how people are travelling, Angela, and whether we have any questions.
Yes, Paul. So we had a question from Joseph who was asking what skills are required for RSA. Now, I think you will be talking about that a little bit later on. Is that right, Paul?
Absolutely, yep. We'll be covering that one off, Joseph.
All right, no worries. Well, thank you for the question, Joseph. And hang in there. See if you still have any questions in relation to that a little bit later on. We'll certainly address those. Another question here. What is the basic difference between road safety audit and road risk assessment?
Okay, well, a road safety audit is looking at from road user perspective, where a risk assessment where I guess we're looking at, we've known crash data, we're also looking at what has happened, whereas with our road safety audit, we're looking for emerging risks and emerging hazards. So you could say that we're certainly being proactive, whereas a risk assessment will typically have an awareness of what has happened or could happen. So I hope that sort of kind of answers it. There is a lot of discussion about the terminology, road safety audit, road safety inspection, which we'll talk about in a moment in that particular way. We do incorporate risk assessments during our audits, and once we sit down and we've written down our risks and our hazards, we then are often asked to apply risk management practices in terms of the likelihood of that particular risk and its severity and its likely impact. So very much linked together, but the main difference for me is the wider road user group.
Alrighty, I hope we've answered that question for you. Thank you for that. We do have another question here from Ashish. How can proactive projects with RSA reports be prioritised or ranked from an investment point of view? Any criteria or tools?
Okay, well, as no doubt aware, there's the benefit cost ratio of the mitigation measure as obviously can be taken into consideration. So that's often the technique. It often comes down to the financial aspects of it. But of course we can assess returns in other ways, in other different categories, multi-criteria assessments where we can have, looking at perhaps some other criteria for assessing how we rank our particular objectives. But it's fundamentally about a risk assessment process. And then we comply. We may well get the individual audit results and then we put them in together with other audits perhaps and come up with a prioritised program based on the number of audits. So that's very possible. We like, personally, I prefer where some money is ring-fenced for mitigation measures for each and every road safety audit, but I appreciate that that's not always possible. So there are lots of different methods, lots of different ways of skinning the cat, so to speak. And during the series that we'll be talking about later, there will obviously be some more information on those sorts of things.
Excellent. Well, I'll let you move on with the presentation then, Paul, and we'll leave that question open in case anyone else has any questions. Sorry. And I have in the chat box typed in our next discussion poll question as well, to which we have received some responses already. To those of you who haven't read that yet, the question there is: road safety auditing should only be carried out on the highest value projects. And your answer choices there are true or false. So we're very interested to hear what you have to say. And we don't want to sway the responses here, but I know what my view on this is, and it seems that most of our audience is agreeing with me. With, again, 100% of our responses so far being false. So that's definitely what we want to hear. Is that right, Paul?
Well, absolutely. I'm very, very encouraged. Just because the project is of the highest value doesn't give any indication at all about its complexity, its challenges, its consideration of road users, its political implications, etc. So there are lots of different ways that we can work out which schemes to audit. But there are lots of jurisdictions we're aware of do actually use the value. They use things like the number of vehicles that might be carried on the original scheme. There are a number of different ways of identifying which particular schemes will get audited, and we'll touch upon a few of those as we come on to the next bit. So, encouraged by the answer. We can effectively audit all sorts of things. As you can read from the list there, let's just pick out a few. Major and minor highway schemes going back to the large and small or expensive and cheap schemes. It can be development things, it can be highway maintenance schemes, traffic management, all these sorts of things we can definitely audit. All types of roads, just picking a few out of the list, it doesn't matter if it's a divided or undivided carriageway. Pedestrian and bicycle routes, we'll come back to what we call thematic audits in a moment. Local area traffic management, traffic calming type schemes, signal upgrades, all these sorts of things. And importantly for 2015, the year of child road safety, safer routes to school type projects, we can certainly audit against our pre-established categories for those. So lots of different things. In terms of the stages, historically we've talked about what we call stages 1 to 5. Now, not so much discussion of 1 to 5 these days, but if we're using that approach, stage 1 would be at the feasibility stage of the design. So when we're first starting to draw some lines on a piece of paper for the route of a particular road, then going through to preliminary design, we can conduct audits at detailed design stage just before the road opens, and then an audit of the existing road. The reason the existing road is in there, or stage 5 road safety audit, as some people call it, is that in other countries and other jurisdictions, existing road audits are termed as road safety inspections. They might also be called road safety assessments, road safety reviews, road safety appraisals. I've all seen terms used to describe effectively just a check on existing roads, considering various road users. So where do they fit in? Well, here's a graphic of that. So the steps in developing a project from the conceptual design, here's where our feasibility stage audit comes in, right the way down to our pre-opening stage after the building. And if then open the traffic, then we do our existing road audit, obviously comes in to the equation there. We're often asked, which stages do we audit at? Well, as a rule of thumb, and what we prefer to suggest is that as many stages as you possibly can. If possible, all of them. We'll come back to that in a moment in our future webinar series about how we might determine a regime or a strategy for that. But it obviously has some cost implications. We might have some options. We might decide to suggest to people that all stages are audited by making audits mandatory. We could also audit on project size, we could audit on project cost, and as I touched upon earlier, we could make some money ring-fenced or make money ring-fenced for us to do road safety auditing at particular stages. So there are various means of funding road safety audits. There are some other stages that people may be aware of where road safety audits can also be effective, not traditionally relating to new build works, if you like, but construction audits where we're looking at the construction of things which are really significant, large and complex schemes traditionally on those. Thematic audits where we're looking to audit in the eyes of a particular road user group. Our client may say the scope is restricted to pedestrians or cyclists or a particular road user group. It may also be a gender audit or a particular age audit that we need to take into account. I've also done in the past what we've been termed as maintainability audits, where you actually audit an existing scheme or a detailed design to see whether it can actually be physically maintained in the future. What equipment you might need against what equipment you have, how you might go about maintaining certain things, for example, changing lights on a busy motorway. Have you actually got the equipment? Have you got a traffic management plan in place to actually enable you to do that? But an audit might also be triggered in another way. There may be a specific trigger such as a high-profile crash. It may be asked for people to do it by the coroner's court, or it may just be in response to a concern from the public or from the media. So it's very flexible in terms of what we can use road safety auditing for, and we can get benefits out of all of them. So how's the road safety audit done? Well, we'll touch upon it in detail in the later webinar, and we'll touch upon how to identify risks, how to use checklists that people use during the road safety audit to help them, reporting requirements and record keeping, and we'll also talk about a little bit about work health and safety in terms of the audit process. In terms of our awareness webinar today, just have a look at the basic steps. We're about selecting the audit team. Remember, two key words, team and independent from the design process. We provide them with some background information. We hold a commencement meeting, and at that we will give a little bit of background information about the scheme. We'll provide some information on the scope of the audit that we're expecting. The auditors will then go and assess the documents, so a little bit of a desk study first perhaps, and then go out and inspect the site. Once the site's been inspected, you bring your records that you made on the particular site, bring them back and start writing up the audit report. As we mentioned, then there's typically a meeting to consider the findings of the audit, and that's between the audit team and the client and the designer. And the client and the designer then go away to think about their responses and to write those up. Hopefully, the audit results are compelling, the client and the designer understand their obligations, and they implement some changes. So in that way, we then get our closing out, as we're talking about, closing that loop, making sure that the audit is totally effective. In terms of our requirements for auditors, well, it varies differently between jurisdictions. And what we typically talk about is a combination of what we call KSE, knowledge, skills and experience. And you can qualify as an auditor by having a combination of these things. But as a general requirement, knowledge of road safety principles, an understanding of local traffic legislation and road rules, and very definitely an ability to think in the perspective of different types of road user groups. Familiarity with traffic operations and various basic traffic management are also good general requirements for auditors. So we build up this picture. In our team, we will typically have somebody who's a lead auditor, and obviously their requirements will be higher from somebody who is just an auditor in the particular team, a team member, or indeed a senior auditor that we might have. So jurisdictions will often set out a tiered system there. In terms of gaining the experience, that's basically down to the number of audits and their complexity, and you raise up the level as you go on as an auditor. So starting off with your general training, going up through the process to hopefully become a lead auditor in the future. So all of these things, a qualification, certification, accreditation, there are various things out there. It does vary, so just a summary there to recap, but the main thing is, if you are interested in auditing or are doing auditing, want to know more about it, please log into your various different jurisdictions and countries and trying to find out how this applies. Something we can help you with if you've got a query and in a particular jurisdiction, we can often help you put you in the right direction of the right people. Going back to the response to the road safety auditing, well, there are basically three responses. The client has the first option, which is to accept the finding completely and to design a solution to overcome the risk or the hazard in its entirety. Or secondary, they can accept part of the recommendation, but due to other constraints, as it says there, we only go part of the way to resolving the problem. But it's really important if you take that second route to document what you're doing, document why you are moving away from the recommendation of the auditor. The final one, unfortunately, is not accepting the finding or recommendation at all. Now, hopefully that's because there is a query or there is a concern or there is some misunderstanding, not quite sure what the recommendation is, in which case we can resolve that, we can talk through it. But the worst case is that the report just sits on the shelf, sits on the desk, and they're not accepted basically because they're not looked at or they're not high enough profile, the audit's not closed out, something else gets done, and that's where we can have a real problem. So the bottom line decision to mitigate the risk of hazard or not, and to do that, as we touched on earlier, we'll frequently adopt a risk management approach. So we will look at the individual recommendations, we will look at the risks and hazards, how severe they are, the likelihood they are to occur. So we will adopt a risk management approach there. But the big question, I guess, we have to think about is always who is paying for these mitigation measures, these corrections. It can be one of the biggest failings for the road safety audit principle, if you like. And we also, we need to encourage that if you are a client, that there is sufficient money also for putting in these mitigation measures in the end. It is also valuable to monitor and evaluate the things that are put in response to a road safety audit. Only in that way will we know whether it's been a failure or successful. Only in that way will it become valuable to us in understanding more about our mitigation measures, what works in certain situations, what doesn't work, what's cost effective, etc., etc. So we get that feedback loop from our monitoring and our evaluation. So that's the next part of the presentation. Let's have a breather. I just want to check how things are going. Perhaps I'll bring David in here at this stage and just wonder if he's got any observations or perhaps some clarity on auditor training within Australia and New Zealand and where things are going with that, perhaps, David.
Thanks, Paul. Everything you've presented is I would agree with. It's all the good principles of how to look at a road project, whether it's design, construction or existing phase. The one thing, particularly for the Australian and New Zealand members of the audience, to be aware of is that the Guide to Road Safety Audit Part 6, the Austroads Guide, is currently under review. Now, as I said, all the principles that you talked about, the approach, everything, are entirely valid and are retained in the new guide, but we have restructured the guide, we have emphasised certain elements, and importantly, particularly I think you made the point, people who might be commissioning audits, the project managers or the sponsors, we've tried to show in the new guide how you should consider an audit, how you should engage an audit team, what sort of makeup they should have, what sort of skills, background, accreditation, and then most importantly, reinforce those last couple of points. How do you consider the findings of the audit? What should you do? There's been a lot of concern, a lot of questions out there from project sponsors about how the auditor can affect a project, and we just try to reinforce what good practice is with the objective of improving road safety. In terms of training and accreditation, part of the review has looked at that across Australia, New Zealand and internationally, and it's another area that we'll be reporting to Austroads to try and enhance the training and the accreditation process. Try and have it as a relatively uniform or at least a consistent level of what is the makeup of a level 3 lead auditor, an audit team member, etc. So everything you've talked about today is valid. It's kept in the new guide, but I'll certainly encourage any practitioners or any project sponsors out there just to get your hands on the new guide when it comes out and have a close look at what changes there may be.
David, any idea when the new guide is likely to come through?
The plan is for it to be completed and submitted to Austroads by June or July this year. They then have a process for preparing it for publication. So I would certainly expect it to be this calendar year and hopefully more to the middle rather than the end. And obviously then there'll be a program of promoting that new guide to practitioners, particularly in local government and state road agencies, so they can be aware of it and adapt their processes.
Excellent. Thanks, David, for that insight. Angela, have we got any questions at this stage?
Yeah, we do, and thank you, David, for your comments and insight, and everybody please do keep an eye out for that guide when it comes out. A question here from Kuzani. So Kuzani is asking, from a legislation point of view, can a road safety audit be considered the safety in design for a project?
Angela, Dave, just I wonder if you could clarify that question, the safety in design. I'm not really familiar with the term or what the point they're trying to make is.
Well, Kuzani, if you could kindly let us know what you meant there, that would be great. But we'll move on to a next question while we wait for that response. So Tony is asking, the TF New South Wales is currently undertaking a major review of road safety audit policy. The development of the new policy has the potential to impact on the current registration requirements and processes for road safety auditors. Has ARB been involved in this review, and if so, is there an envisaged completion timeframe?
Again, David here. We have been involved in the periphery of that review. It's something that ARB had done a couple of years ago for the Centre for Road Safety, who are now under Transport for New South Wales. The review of training and accreditation, as I said, is being looked at a national level, not just by Austroads. A number of jurisdictions are independently looking at it, not just New South Wales. Western Australia is quite advanced in reviewing their training material, their training structure, and then the accreditation that will flow from that. What we're doing at an Austroads level is trying to coordinate that. So, as I mentioned earlier, there's a degree of harmonisation about the requirements. So time frame, no, because it's different to the guide review process, but it's certainly something we can chase up with the Centre for Road Safety about New South Wales in particular.
Great. Question here from Kevin. So Kevin's asking if a working template or spreadsheet is available for use on site and compliant to current standards as a guideline to conduct an RSA.
Okay, well the current Austroads guide and a number of kindred type documents from around the world tend to use a checklist approach, so that gives people some information there. In our later part of our series we'll also be introducing people to various different formats of tables to be recording road safety audit findings in there. We're also aware of some toolkits and some more recent technology or apps, if you like, that can be used to record auditing and prompt parts of audits. So there are a few things available there. We probably haven't got too much time to mention them in any detail, but drop us a line, we can help you, or simple sort of Google searches on road safety auditing tools, etc. I'm certainly aware of a number in the US, and certainly I'll bring up one in a moment that we're involved with in Australia.
I'll just add, Paul, to one of the key areas we looked at in the review of the existing guide is about enhancing the structure of a road safety audit report. A lot of the feedback from the jurisdictions is wide variability and of audit reports that are submitted, but also about how road safety issues are identified. So we are looking at providing some templates, some sort of practice audit reports that can be used as a basic template, and we're going to try and have some clear categories of road safety deficiencies so that you can start to compare one audit finding of a route against another and work out what is the dominant road safety deficiency that an audit might find.
Alrighty, we might take one more question for the moment before we move on with the presentation. So this one's been sent through by Carl. Thank you, Carl. In regional areas, it would be likely that the same designer and the same audit team would be used for each project. Would this diminish the benefits and allow systematic mistakes to get through?
Oh, look, I think there's potential for that. What I'm aware of people doing is collaboration between different jurisdictions and road agencies to try and to get around that, to recognise that issue and to freshen up the audit process where it might be needed. The other thing, of course, there's nothing to stop you peer reviewing somebody else's road safety audit just from an overview or a general perspective, just to make sure that they are it's understood and that it's going to have some value going off to the designer, and to ask some sort of what if devil's advocate type questions on what's been written. So there's a couple of things that immediately spring to mind here, and David's got a few other thoughts as well, I think.
Again, just in the review of the existing guide, recognising the difficulty, the expense sometimes of getting an audit team out to a regional area. The new guide will promote working together, so if it's a local government issue, for example, two adjoining councils might be able to share audit teams and audit each other's projects, and that introduces a level of independence, that fresh eye approach that Paul mentioned. The other thing is we're introducing a couple of new levels of audits. There is only really one level of road safety audit, but recognising the cost and the difficulty getting a team out to some locations, we're saying that you could consider something called a road safety check. It follows the same audit process, but it has really only a one-person audit, and the basis to that is to say having a road safety check following the audit process is better than doing nothing, but it needs to be recognised. It wouldn't it wouldn't be classed as a road safety audit if it ever came to being questioned later.
Okay, Angela, did we get the clarification on that previous question before we move on?
We did. I can shoot that through now, or perhaps wait until the next stage of the presentation.
Okay, if it's okay, let's hold it back. Let's go through a bit more material, and then we can pick that one up at the end, I guess. Okay, well, let's move on to a very simple question, I guess, then, and with the quality of the audience we have here today, this one should be an absolute doddle. Road safety audits are compulsory, and the recommendations of the auditors must be implemented. True or false?
Alrighty, so this one's going to work a little bit differently to the previous two discussion questions. On the blue pop-up box on your screen, the question will be written there with true or false as the answer choices. So if everyone could just type whichever is relevant and send those through, I'll monitor them at our end. So we'll leave that open for just another moment while everyone has a think about the question and gets their responses through. But though not quite a unanimous vote, false is certainly in the lead. And I might just close that off and share those results with everybody. So as you can see there, 84% of our audience answered false, with a smaller 16% saying true. Paul, what are your thoughts?
Okay, that's interesting. I guess the answer could be true if you are doing something like a World Bank project in overseas or a Asian Development Bank where there can be a requirement for road safety audits to occur at different stages. So look, there is potential for that answer to be true. False is the overwhelming answer in terms of what's happening in Australia and New Zealand there. So
I think too, Paul, the other reason it could be true is as you mentioned about the development bank type requirements, individual jurisdictions may make audits mandatory at certain stages, and so everyone needs to refer to their jurisdictional requirements. But when it comes down to it, there's no legislative backing to requiring audits at every single stage, or that an audit finding must be implemented. It really comes back to being aware of the issues and then taking appropriate action within the scope of the budget and the project and timing and everything else you mentioned.
all right, let's have a little think about where things can go wrong. Not wishing to be overly pessimistic, but just things perhaps we need to look at in terms of road safety auditing, as David said, in the middle of the review process here. So what can cause us a few problems? Well, getting audits done, as has been alluded to, getting that audit team together, getting it out there on site, finding the opportunity, the budget to do that and the inclination to do that can often be quite difficult. The quality of the audit scope can also be a bit of an issue. The client and the sponsor can just say, well, I don't know, just audit everything. And that puts the auditor in a really difficult situation. We need to be quite accurate in that scope in terms of that, but also in terms of the quality of the general auditing process, the quality of which we talked about in terms of the reports and the recommendations. How useful are they for people? How easily can they be considered? But no doubt, getting recommendations implemented is the weak link in the chain. It really is. And it's a real shame to me that the investment is into a road safety audit and then the report just sits there looking there, not least because of the number of lives that could be saved ultimately in the future as a result of putting in the recommendations from the audit. So that's something that we need to obviously be aware of, and we need to keep chipping away at just to make sure that audits are fully resolved. One of the other things is taking responsibility for the road safety audits and what happens afterwards. As the cartoon says here, we've got some poor soul in the road safety audit team basically saying we've got a target here to save more lives on our roads and road safety audit will help. But unfortunately, due to what we sometimes call a silo mentality and the way that we structure various different organisations, people in other teams aren't necessarily as responsive. So we could have someone in the traffic management scheme, teams, or the asset management team, or the network planning team, just aren't going to come to the party to make sure that things are funded, things are done, and that we actually get the maximum benefit out of the road safety audit process. But I don't want people to go away thinking too despondent. If you're new to road safety auditing, and a lot of this today is just a good general awareness, there is lots of help out there. There are lots of guides around the world. They do tend to be on a variation on a theme. They do tend to have a very similar coverage, presented in slightly different ways in different areas. And they often refer to the same sort of research and technical papers as background. So there shouldn't be too many surprises there. David's done a big sweep, as he mentioned, of a number of guides. He touched upon the Austroads one. For people that are in low-income countries, Asia Pacific region, Austroads has made a very generous gesture to make the whole guide to road safety series available to people, and they can also get hold of a copy of part 6 of that series, which is included road safety auditing. So the guide is there and available to people, so there's some instruction there, or indeed if afterwards, if that If you've forgotten how to go about that, then just drop us a quick line and we can remind you of how to get hold of a copy of those particular manuals. So that can be very valuable to people. But in terms of guides, here's a page that just shows a number of different variations of road safety audit manuals. The current Australia and New Zealand one is shown on the top left. Some from the UK, from the road agency in the middle top, to a professional organisation, the Institution of Highway and Transportation on the top right. The current Road and Maritime Services guide to road safety auditing in Australia, a guide from the USA, and then a guide from South Africa. So just to give you a bit of a flavour, there are a number of different audit guides. I'm not suggesting that this is all of them. There are a number out there, so please familiarise yourself with what's available. In terms of HIARC, as you may have heard of, or the World Road Association, as they're more commonly known as these days, they have a technical committee C3, which has produced a report on road safety auditing. So there's the front cover there. So that's for more of an international focus on road safety auditing. So it could be good to have a look at. And there are also a number of Economic Union EU documents on what they call road safety inspections and road safety auditing, and that's under a project called Pilot for Safety, which is running in the European Union at the moment. So, yep, there's lots of guidance out there. We touched upon tools and apps and various things. One of the things that ARB is quite pleased to bring you in terms of, in collaboration with Austroads, is what's called the Road Safety Audit Toolkit. It's a free tool. If you go onto our website, you'll find links to it. And for the sake of just logging on and asking for a password, you'll get access to this particular toolkit. And it will take you through the road safety audit process, and indeed it's got the existing template for road safety audit reporting. But as David mentioned, there will be some changes coming, some improvements, and I would imagine the toolkit will also be revised. David's nodding furiously here, so yeah, it will be revised as part of the project. So that one could be of interest to people on that. All right, so what's next? Well, I alluded to the fact that this is the first in a series of webinars. Here's the flyer that you may well have seen or certainly become aware of our free awareness webinar today. Here's the one here. As you can see, there are a number of different sessions, 7 there, which will go through in detail various different facets of road safety auditing. They're going to be held once a week, normally on a Thursday afternoon, and available. So if you want some more information, have a look out for that flyer, and that should hopefully help people through. To register for that training or to get further information, here's some different references and links here. There's a wide link there, but also there's Angela's details again if you want to send her an email or ring her up and ask for some more information on those particular training activities.
Absolutely.
Okay,
So cut in there, Paul. I was just going to say, and even if you don't get a chance to write that down, I'll be in touch with everyone with the webinar recording and presentation material as I described in the beginning. And again, that will be a great opportunity for you to get in touch if this further training is something that might be of interest to you.
Okay, excellent. Just leaves me to wrap things up. We'll have a final burst of questions in a moment if there are any. But we've looked at the very basic principles of road safety auditing. From the experience of David and myself, there's little variation in them around the world. They tend to be a bit of a tried and tested formula. Road safety auditing does work. That's the reason they're there. It does provide benefits, but it needs to be done in a structured and systematic way. It needs to be done by a team of auditors, needs to be done by auditors that are independent from the design team. The auditors are looking to pick out risks and hazards and then put forward some recommendations as to how they might be mitigated. And then the sponsor or the client of the audit will then determine their response, either to decide to implement in full, to implement in part and come up with some other thoughts, or indeed, unfortunately, to do nothing. But hopefully we'll get some positive action as a result of a road safety audit. It's really important road safety audits can play a big part in reducing our road toll, reducing the number of people killed and seriously injured on our roads. Before we touch on some final questions, I personally want to thank David for his involvement today. It's been great to have him here and giving a different insight onto things and answering a few questions along the way. I don't know if David, you've got any closing thoughts?
No, I certainly commend everyone to jump on board for the road safety audit process. As I said, keep an eye out for the new guide because there are some quite significant changes to the guide, but as I said, not the underlying principles. And we're certainly looking at making sure the safe system approach, which no doubt most of you have heard of, is fully understood by road safety auditors. And thanks for the opportunity.
Andrew, have we got any further questions before I put up my last slide?
That last one that we needed to clarify.
We do have a few questions. I'm not sure if you wanted to finish up and then we can take those after or first. Up to you, Paul.
How many are there, Andrew?
We've got about 5 or 6 we can address.
All right. Okay. Well, let's close it down then for those that feel satisfied and got other things to move on to. Just to say thank you on my behalf for everyone's attendance today. Here's some contact details. Please see it as the start of the story. If you've got any questions, anything you want to clarify, then please use me as a conduit to that. As Andrew said, you'll be getting a copy of the information out anyway, but if there's something you're not quite sure of on a particular slide, just quickly send me a brief email and I will respond. Okay, so thank you to the few people drifting away. We understand and enjoy your Easter. And for those who've got questions, just bear with us and we'll answer those one by one.
Thank you very much, Paul. And yes, to those of you who have to leave, apologies if we've gone over time. Happy Easter to you, and we hope you can join us next time. Now, we just in that last minute have had a few more questions come through, so if we don't get an opportunity to address them today, please obviously feel free to touch base with us. Some of them are sort of multifaceted and may warrant a chat with Paul perhaps rather than through this webinar. So if that's the case, please feel free to get in touch with us at any time. All right, so backtracking a little bit, question here from Carl. Do you think it's still a good idea to do an audit if no money is budgeted for putting through the recommendations?
I would definitely say yes. There are a number of very low-cost mitigation measures out there that will have a considerable effect, or can have a considerable effect, give us a very good crash reduction. So, might not be able to get there immediately, but if we can get there in a few months' time, free some money up somehow, some way, to do some of those, then, as David mentioned, I think alluded to, sometimes we're better off doing something than nothing. So.
And knowing about the problem is the first step to trying to fix the problem. So doing an audit can always at least highlight the issue. There's always a concern about liability. That's a different webinar, but that's not going to make it any worse for you. So yeah, definitely do an audit, find out what the issues are, and then develop a strategy to mitigate them.
And also an awareness of like issues. We talked about patterns and trends and things that are picked up as well, so it can also help with that.
Great. Well, a question here from Kevin, and he's actually left, but I think it's applicable to probably a few people in the audience. So Kevin's asked if participants can be advised when the Part 6 updates are available. We can probably even run a webinar on that. David, you'd be happy to deliver that, wouldn't you?
There's definitely plans for a webinar, but I would strongly recommend everyone get onto the Austroads website. If you don't have a profile on there, register and sign up to the Road Watch alert, because any new guides and other studies that Austroads publish are automatically, an alert is emailed to people who are registered. As I said, we're hoping certainly before the end of this calendar year the guides will be available.
That's a great tip. Get in touch with Austroads there, and if anyone's not sure about their website, I'll send that through once the webinar has concluded as well. Question here from Steve. Are nighttime road audits optional?
I'd call them essential and about optional. Yes, I mean, A number of people ask us this question, and it's a difficult one. I understand the reason for asking it, but there are some unique things about the network at night time, and understanding how things work in reduced lighting, not just about the total pitch black type audit, but also as there's a transition between lights, and we're going into night time and also in the morning as well as we reach dawn sometimes. It really just depends on the individual scheme, the objectives of the scheme, where it is, whether there's been some predetermined issues, there have been some problems in the site in the past. All those sorts of things can make a night audit really, really essential. But I would always suggest that people try and do it wherever they possibly can.
And you'd be surprised how often street lighting can actually be a misleading road factor, and could get people into trouble, particularly when driving at night. So, and you can really only observe that at night when the street lights are on, definitely a night audit.
Alrighty, so we've had a question here from Samer who's asking who's responsible for the RSA, the designer or the client. So I'm guessing that's more a funding question.
Who's responsible for starting off the process? Definitely the client and the project sponsor. The designer plays their part, obviously, in making the audit happen and scoping the audit, etc. But it has to be driven by the client sponsor. Hence, David saying that a lot of the stuff in the new guide is about really enforcing and hitting home to people why audits are really, really important to get them done.
Alrighty, a question here from Adam. Adam's asking, how should you deal with very poor audits?
That's one of the reasons we're looking at the guide and reviewing it and changing its emphasis in certain areas. As I did indicate, there was a lot of feedback from jurisdictions, people who commission audits, local government practitioners who commission auditors, highly variable quality of audits. It's like anything, you're engaging someone to deliver a service. If you're not happy with that service, I would suggest you go back to the people who prepared the audit report first. If you have some doubts about their quality and efficacy about how they're doing things, then perhaps certainly advise your local jurisdiction, because your jurisdictions at this stage are in charge of accreditation. And what we don't want is to perpetuate poor experience, bad audit quality by continually commissioning people who really shouldn't be in the game.
Just a bit of an angle on that, and please don't take this the wrong way. It's not necessarily a bad audit if it says things that you don't want to hear. Sorry, I know it's a bit of a glib statement. I'm sure you understand what I mean by that. But we need to be aware of, sometimes in the audits there are things which make our life hard. We've got to adjust to them. We've got to respond to them. So it's not all races out there. We need to be sensible and understand the audit process and the value of some of the recommendations. So.
Alrighty, I will take one more question before we finish up for the day, and a few of those people who have asked questions have actually left, so I might leave it up to you, Paul, to get in touch with them after the webinar perhaps. So a question here from Des. Des is asking, why has there been no mention of the value of experienced road policing input into RSAs and as key team members? Any thoughts on that?
Oh, look, I guess I touched upon it very, very briefly, and I apologise for not much detail there, but when I mentioned about the audit team can be expanded, can improve, it can include professionals, of course it can include road enforcement professionals involved in that process as well, as part of the audit team to have a contribution. We've got some valuable points to make, so certainly not discounting that. My apologies if I fell a bit short on that bit, but basically you can bring in to the audit team people who you think are going to add value, that have got those knowledge, skills and experience that will add to it. So forgive me if I fell short there, but it wasn't the intention.
All right, well on that note, I'll wish everybody a very safe and restful Easter long weekend, starting very soon, so hopefully you can log off this webinar and start your holiday if you're lucky enough. As the webinar closes down, ladies and gentlemen, you will see a survey pop up on your screen. It is extremely brief, just a few short questions. Please let us know how we travelled today. Obviously, we need your feedback to know how we can improve for future. So don't let that one slide. Please fill it in. Thank you very much, Paul, and also David, for joining me today from Sydney, and for your time in preparing this material today. We've had a number of comments here saying that our audience has found it very beneficial, so I'm certainly glad to hear that. Obviously, anyone who is interested in learning more, we do have that upcoming webinar series that will go into everything in more detail. Obviously, there's only so much we can cover in this short hour. So please do join us again when that one comes up in June. And thanks very much again, Paul and David, and we'll see you all next time.
Absolute pleasure as always, and we'll see people soon. Catch up with people soon.
Thank you.